Hello, dear viewers. Welcome back to Nova World News Now. I'm Nova. Here are the key highlights of today's news. December 27th, 2 in the morning, Kyiv time. 519 drones and 40 missiles are screaming toward Ukraine's capital. Kinzhal hypersonics, Iskander ballistics, Kalibr cruise missiles. The largest aerial assault in weeks. 2 people will die. 46 will be wounded. 40% of Kyiv will lose heat. And somewhere over the Atlantic, Volodymyr Zelensky is making a decision that will confuse every analyst watching. He's flying to America, but he's not flying to Mar-a-Lago FIRST. He's flying to Halifax. That wasn't a scheduling detail. It wasn't a courtesy stop, and it definitely wasn't symbolic. What happened on that tarmac in Nova Scotia quietly rewrote who actually anchors negotiations when the stakes are highest. This is the story no one told you. For years, the global assumption was simple. If Ukraine wanted peace, security guarantees, or leverage against Russia, Washington was the gatekeeper. Every serious negotiation ran through the United States. Every outcome depended on American approval. Canada? Supportive. Secondary. Helpful, but not essential. That assumption shaped media coverage, diplomatic analysis, and how governments planned their strategies. When Zelensky announced he would meet Trump at Mar-a-Lago, most observers treated it as the inevitable moment where everything would finally move forward. Canada barely registered in those expectations. And then Zelensky's plane landed at Halifax Stanfield International Airport. The moment it touched down, that entire hierarchy stopped making sense. Because if Canada were truly secondary, there would have been no reason to stop there at all. Leaders in wartime don't waste time on courtesy visits. They don't detour for symbolism when lives, territory, and national survival are on the line. Zelensky didn't visit Canada after meeting Trump. He went before. That timing flipped everything. The groundwork started 24 hours earlier. On Friday, December 26th, Zelensky called Mark Carney directly, not a diplomatic formality, a strategy session. The language released afterward was unusually precise. Zelensky updated Carney on Ukraine's diplomatic efforts with the United States. That word matters. Leaders update partners. They inform subordinates. They brief observers. Carney wasn't being told what would happen. He was being brought into the process before it unfolded. Canada's response was equally deliberate. Carney affirmed Canada's commitment to Ukraine throughout these negotiations. Not before negotiations, not during active fighting. Throughout. That single word signaled something critical. Canada was not tying its support to Trump's mood, Trump's timeline, or Trump's version of success. It was committing to continuity regardless of how unpredictable Washington might become. At 1 p.m. Atlantic time on Saturday, December 27th, Zelensky stepped off his plane. Mark Carney was waiting. They embraced. Then walked to the bilateral meeting that would precede everything else. Carney stood before cameras and announced something concrete: $2.5 billion in new economic assistance, loan guarantees to the World Bank, financing unlocks for the International Monetary Fund, extended debt service suspension, but the money wasn't the point. The point was what Carney said next. A just and lasting peace requires a willing Russia. Then he looked at the cameras and called Moscow's overnight assault exactly what it was: barbarism. That morning, Russia had killed 2 people, wounded 46 more, targeted energy infrastructure across Ukraine's capital. Moscow claimed it was retaliation for Ukrainian attacks. Zelensky called it Russia's answer to our peace efforts. And then he said something that should have made every analyst pay closer attention. Moscow has turned down even proposals for a Christmas ceasefire and is intensifying the brutality of its missile and drone strikes. Russia wasn't negotiating. It was stalling. Zelensky understood this, and he made sure Canada understood it before anyone else. After their bilateral meeting, something happened that received almost no coverage. Zelensky and Carney joined a video call with European leaders. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, European Council President Antonio Costa, leaders from Germany, France, Finland, Denmark, Estonia. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte dialed in. For over an hour, they coordinated positions, aligned messaging, reinforced the framework that would shape whatever came next at Mar-a-Lago. Trump was scheduled to be on that call. He wasn't. That absence told you everything about who was actually setting the agenda. This is where the story gets deeper than most people realize. While media focused on individual leaders and dramatic meetings, Zelensky has been operating inside something far more powerful than any single deal. A coalition of 35 countries committed to Ukraine's sovereignty. Not a temporary alignment. Not a press-driven alliance. A long-term framework built on shared principles rather than personalities. Led by the United Kingdom and France, this coalition of the willing was announced in March 2025 at the London summit. Its stated purpose: to facilitate peace negotiations while providing security guarantees strong enough to make any deal actually hold. By September 2025, 26 of those countries had formally committed to deploy military contingents or provide air and sea support to Ukraine after any ceasefire. A multinational reassurance force, not fighting Russia directly, deterring renewed aggression. French President Emmanuel Macron called it the framework for real security guarantees. The UK and France established a joint operational headquarters. Military planning groups convened for intensive sessions. Legal and political work began to implement what they'd agreed. This isn't rhetoric, it's infrastructure. Canada sits near the center of this coalition, present at every major meeting, contributing to every planning session, coordinating through NATO's new training command for Ukraine. And here's what matters. This coalition exists outside Trump's control, outside any one capital's agenda, outside the volatility of election cycles. Deals can be reversed. Announcements can be walked back. Coalitions endure because they're slow, bureaucratic, and frustratingly boring, which is exactly what makes them stable. Canada didn't drift into this position. It built it. Since February 2022, Canada has committed nearly $22 billion in multifaceted assistance to Ukraine, over $12 billion in direct financial support, $6.5 billion in military aid through 2029. According to the Kiel Institute, Canada ranks fifth globally among Ukraine donors, the largest per capita contributor in the G7. In August 2025, Prime Minister Carney made an unannounced visit to Kyiv on Ukraine's Independence Day. He pledged another $2 billion in military support, armored vehicles, drone capabilities, air defense systems sourced through NATO's prioritized Ukraine requirements list. While other governments hesitated, waiting to see how Washington's politics would swing, Ottawa stayed consistent. Military aid continued, financial assistance flowed, refugees were resettled. Diplomatic pressure remained steady even when global attention drifted elsewhere. No grandstanding, no threats, just follow through. That consistency created something far more valuable than leverage: credibility. When Zelensky talks about security guarantees, he isn't just talking about weapons or borders. He's talking about who stays when the headlines move on, who remains committed when wars become politically inconvenient, who honors agreements when there's no applause left. Trump can offer speed. He can offer visibility. He can offer bold declarations that dominate news cycles. But he can't guarantee continuity. Canada can. 24 hours after Halifax, Zelensky arrived at Mar-a-Lago. Trump had already spoken with Putin, a call lasting over 2 hours that morning. Good and very productive, Trump called it. Putin's foreign policy advisor later told Russian media the conversation was conducted in a friendly tone. The Ukrainian delegation entered the main dining room. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. On the Ukrainian side, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, National Security Council Secretary Rustem Umerov, Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. For 3 hours, they negotiated. Then they spoke with European leaders by video conference for another hour. When they emerged, both leaders struck optimistic tones. Trump said they covered 95% of the issues. Zelensky said the 20-point peace plan was 90% agreed. Security guarantees, he claimed, were 100% agreed. Trump immediately interjected, 95%. The thorniest issue? Territory, the Donbas region. Russia's demand that Ukraine cede it entirely. That's what they've been asking for, Trump acknowledged. There's a dispute about that. Zelensky was clear. We have to respect our law and our people. We respect the territory which we control. Any territorial decision would require a referendum. 60 days minimum ceasefire just to hold a legitimate vote. Without it, any result would be illegitimate. Trump announced that teams would meet in the coming weeks, possibly in Washington. Progress had been made, but the hardest questions remained unanswered. This is where the difference between Trump and Carney becomes critical. Donald Trump views diplomacy through transactions. You give something, you get something. Both sides declare victory. It's fast, dramatic, built for headlines. That approach can produce quick deals, but it often fails when circumstances change, leadership turns over, or enforcement becomes inconvenient. Mark Carney operates from a different framework entirely. He thinks in systems, not moments. What agreements survive elections? What commitments hold when leadership changes? What structures prevent backsliding when attention fades? For Ukraine, that difference is existential. Territorial compromises are not just lines on a map. They are precedents. They tell every ambitious power watching whether aggression works. They define whether sovereignty is protected by law or rewritten by force. Trump might see territorial compromise as deal-making. Carney sees it as precedent-setting. That difference becomes dangerous when the final pieces of a peace plan are on the table. Zelensky didn't stop in Canada for validation. He stopped for calibration. He needed to ensure that whatever was discussed at Mar-a-Lago wouldn't lock Ukraine into a framework that collapses the moment enforcement becomes inconvenient. By the time he sat down with Trump, something critical had already changed. He didn't arrive as a leader hoping to secure support. He arrived as a leader already backed by it. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Negotiating from isolation invites pressure. Negotiating from alignment creates leverage. Canada didn't need to be loud about its role. It didn't need to dominate headlines or demand recognition. Its influence was already built into the framework Zelensky carried with him, a framework grounded in coalition support, institutional continuity, and shared expectations about what a real peace must look like. Most people will remember the headlines from Mar-a-Lago, the statements, the speculation, the arguments over who won the meeting. That's how modern politics is consumed. Loud moments, fast takes, short attention spans. But the real story happened earlier. It happened quietly, in Canada. Zelensky's decision to stop in Halifax wasn't about courtesy or symbolism. It was about recognizing where stability still exists in an increasingly unstable world. It was about anchoring high-risk negotiations in reliability rather than spectacle. This wasn't a rejection of American power. It was an acknowledgement of American unpredictability. In the 21st century, influence no longer comes only from military size, economic dominance, or volume. It comes from consistency, from showing up when others hesitate, from honoring commitments when headlines fade. Canada didn't become influential by being loud, it became influential by being dependable. The old assumption that every global crisis must run through Washington is quietly breaking down. Countries are hedging. They're diversifying their diplomatic anchors. They're choosing partners who don't change course every election cycle. Zelensky's move made that visible. He didn't arrive at Trump's table as a desperate negotiator. He arrived anchored to a coalition, backed by institutions, supported by partners who think beyond the next press conference. That changes everything about how negotiations unfold and how outcomes hold. Canada provided something Trump couldn't: predictability. A commitment that doesn't expire when administrations change. A partner whose word means the same thing in January as it does in December. That's not glamorous. It doesn't generate viral clips or trending hashtags, but it's the foundation upon which lasting peace is actually built. This is the new geography of influence. Less noise, more endurance, less theater, more trust. And for those still watching only the loudest stage, the most important decisions will continue to happen somewhere else, quietly, steadily, long before the cameras arrive. This is my personal viewpoint and perspective. Thank you for tuning in. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe and hit the bell, because the patterns shaping global power aren't covered on cable news. They're hidden in stops like Halifax, and now you know where to look.